She is a virgin, married, but her husband has never touched her. Loneliness consumes her with each passing day. One afternoon, she confesses to a friend the emptiness of her married life, unaware that someone is listening. This someone is not who they seem to be, and is about to change everything she knows. If you like love and romance stories, watch until the end, and you won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment saying where you're listening to this beautiful story from. Let's continue. The mirror in the master bedroom reflected a woman many would consider perfect. Helen Gardner Montgomery adjusted her diamond earrings, preparing for another night of appearances. At 27, she had become an expert at smiling at the right moment, at tilting her head elegantly as photographers fired their cameras, at being the exemplary wife everyone expected to see beside Edward Montgomery. But in that reflection, only she could see the truth hiding behind her perfectly made-up green eyes, a loneliness that ached in her chest, an emptiness that grew each day like a wound that would never heal. "Helen, are you ready?" Edward's voice echoed from the hallway. He didn't even enter the bedroom. It had been months since he'd set foot in there, preferring his office or the guest room. 3 years of marriage, and she was still surprised by the distance he maintained, as if she were a piece of decor too valuable to be touched. "I'm coming," she replied, grabbing the designer clutch that perfectly matched her navy blue dress, another piece of the perfect wife's costume. The mansion on the Upper East Side was silent, only their footsteps echoing on the marble as they headed to the garage. Edward was checking messages on his phone, as always. A congressman for 8 years, he lived connected to his work, to political dealings, to the power plays that kept him relevant in Washington, D.C. Helen had learned not to interrupt these moments of concentration. "Tonight is the Hope Foundation's charity dinner," he said, without looking up from the screen. "Some important business leaders will be there. John Henry Ashton will be there, the one from the construction firms. It's crucial that we make a good impression." Helen nodded. It was always about making a good impression. Her entire life had been reduced to that since she got married. Before that, too, actually, the Gardner family had lost almost everything when she was still a teenager. Her father, a textile industrialist, saw his empire crumble during a devastating economic crisis. Her mother, accustomed to the luxuries of New York high society, never recovered from the social downfall. When Edward asked for her hand in marriage, Helen was only 24, and her family was on the brink of total bankruptcy. The marriage wasn't presented as a union of love, but as an opportunity for reconstruction for both families. He needed a wife who would bring respectability to his name. She needed financial security, a civilized agreement, as her father had explained, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The chauffeur opened the door of the black Mercedes. Helen slid into the car, the silk dress settling perfectly on the leather seat. Edward sat beside her, but he could have been on another planet. The space between them on the seat seemed like an impassable abyss. During the drive to the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach, where the event would take place, Helen watched the scenery through the window. They had flown from New York that afternoon for this social occasion. Edward considered it important to make an appearance at Miami events, expanding his network of influence beyond New York's borders. "Are you all right?" he asked suddenly, noticing she was quieter than usual. Helen turned to him, surprised by the question. Edward rarely showed genuine interest in her well-being. "I am just thinking." "About what?" She hesitated. How could she explain that she was thinking about the emptiness she felt every morning upon waking? How could she say she felt like an actress, playing a role she hadn't chosen? How could she confess that she sometimes wondered what it would be like to be touched, kissed, desired by someone? About the foundation. "It's an important cause, helping underprivileged children," she lied, turning back to the window. Edward nodded and returned to his phone. The conversation was over, as it always was. Loose, polite words, empty of any real meaning. The Fontainebleau Hotel was resplendent that March evening. Golden lights illuminated the iconic facade, and a line of luxury cars formed at the main entrance. Photographers awaited the distinguished guests, and Helen automatically adjusted her posture as the driver opened her door. The perfect smile settled on her face the exact moment she stepped onto the red carpet. Edward offered his arm, and she accepted, once again playing the part of the ideal couple. Flash, smile, wave. Flash, smile, wave. A dance she had memorized to perfection. The hotel's grand ballroom was decorated with white and gold flowers. Round tables accommodated the 300 guests, all dressed in the finest from their jewelers and closets. Helen greeted dozens of people whose names she had memorized for occasions like this. Wives of politicians, business leaders, socialites, all part of the same high society. Theatre. "Helen, darling," a familiar voice made her turn. Bianca Rogers was approaching with a genuine smile, a rarity in this environment of calculated smiles. Bianca was her childhood friend, the only person with whom Helen still maintained a true connection. The daughter of a diplomat, she had grown up traveling the world but always returned to the States. At 30, she was an independent woman, worked as an art curator, and had never married, something that generated malicious comments among the society ladies. "Bianca, so good to see you," Helen hugged her with genuine affection. "You look stunning, as always. That dress is to die for." Bianca examined her friend's look with approval. "And Edward? Did he leave you alone again?" Helen looked around and located her husband, talking animatedly with a group of men near the bar. "He's networking. You know the routine." Bianca made a face of disapproval. 3 years of marriage and he still treats you like a luxury accessory." "Bianca," Helen chided gently. It was dangerous to talk like that in public, even if it was true. "Sorry, dear, it just irritates me to see you like this." "Like what?" "As if you've been dimmed. You were so vibrant when we were young. You had dreams, plans, your own personality. Now it seems you've turned into an ideal version of what others expect of you." Bianca's words struck Helen like a direct arrow. It was exactly how she felt, but she had never been able to put it into words with such clarity. "It's complicated, Bea. You can't fully understand." "Then explain it to me. We've been friends for almost 20 years. You can talk to me about anything." Helen glanced again toward Edward. He seemed completely absorbed in his conversation, gesturing enthusiastically about some political project. This was how she saw him happy, when he talked about work, power, influence, never when he looked at her. "Let's get some air. It's too hot in here," Helen suggested. The two made their way to the balcony overlooking Miami Beach. The sea was calm, reflecting the city lights. A few people were chatting in small groups, but there were more private spots where they could speak freely. "Now tell me, what's going on?" Bianca leaned against the marble balustrade. Helen took a deep breath, feeling the sea breeze on her face. For a moment she wanted to tell her everything. About the lonely nights, the lack of intimacy, about feeling like a stranger in her own life. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was the weight of family secrets, or the fear of admitting aloud what she already knew in her heart. "Sometimes I feel lost," she confessed partially, "like I'm living someone else's life." Bianca held her hand warmly. "Helen, you're still young. You have a right to be happy, to make your own choices." "And abandon everything? The stability, the family, the responsibilities?" "What responsibilities? You don't have children. You don't need this marriage to survive. Your parents were the ones who made the bad business choices, not you." Helen knew her friend was right in many ways, but reality was more complex than it seemed from the outside. Her marriage to Edward had not only saved her family from total ruin, but had also secured a future for her aging parents. Besides, there were aspects of her married life she had never told anyone, not even Bianca. "It's more complicated than you think," she said finally. "How so?" "Helen, you're worrying me. Is there something you're not telling me?" Helen's heart raced. For a moment, she was tempted to reveal the most intimate and humiliating truth of her life, but she looked around, saw the other guests, remembered where she was and who she was married to. "Let's go back inside. Edward must be looking for me." Bianca seemed frustrated with her friend's evasion but didn't press. She knew Helen well enough to know when she had decided to shut down. Back in the ballroom, Helen located Edward still engrossed in his political conversations. He gave a brief nod when he saw her but didn't approach. During dinner, they sat side by side, but they might as well have been at different tables. Edward talked with the businessmen about infrastructure projects, while Helen exchanged pleasantries with their wives about decor and travel. It was during dessert that she noticed a man sitting alone at a nearby table, tall with dark hair slightly graying at the temples, wearing an impeccably tailored suit. He seemed to be observing the room with interest, but there was something in his gaze that unsettled her. When their eyes met briefly, she felt a strange shiver. "Who is that man?" she asked discreetly to the lady sitting next to her, a well-known figure in Miami society. The woman followed her gaze and soon identified the stranger. "Oh, that's Valentin d'Alencourt, heir to d'Alencourt Laboratories. Old money, very rich, but he's a bit of a recluse. Rarely appears at social events." Helen felt an unexpected curiosity. There was something magnetic about the way the man observed everything around him, as if he were a predator studying his prey. When he looked in her direction again, Helen quickly averted her eyes, focusing on the dessert she had barely touched. The rest of the night passed in a blur of polite conversations and automatic smiles. When they finally arrived at the hotel where they were staying, Helen felt exhausted, not physically, but emotionally drained from another night of performing. In the master bedroom of the presidential suite, Edward was changing in the bathroom while Helen sat at the vanity to remove her makeup. It was always like this. He changed in the bathroom, she in the bedroom. Then he would check emails on his laptop while she pretended to read a book in bed. Eventually, one of them would murmur good night and they would turn off the lights, sleeping on their respective sides of the king-size bed, with a space between them that felt like a continent. "The event was productive," Edward commented, emerging from the bathroom already in his pajamas. "I managed to align some important issues with the construction people." "That's good," Helen replied automatically, removing her earrings. "Tomorrow we have lunch with the people from the energy sector. You remember, right? Wear that beige suit that looks very elegant on you." Helen nodded, looking at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her seemed like a stranger. When was the last time someone had touched her? With affection? When was the last time she had felt desired, cherished, alive? "Edward," she said suddenly, turning to him. "Yes?" He stopped organizing the documents he had brought in his briefcase. For a moment, Helen considered asking him directly about the distance between them, about the lack of intimacy, about the fact that in 3 years of marriage they had never been truly intimate. But the words got stuck in her throat. "Nothing. Good night." "Good night, Helen." The lights went out, but Helen remained awake for a long time, listening to her husband's steady breathing beside her. In the darkness of the luxurious room overlooking Miami Beach, she allowed herself to admit the truth she carried like a weight in her chest. She was wasting her life in a sham that benefited everyone but herself. And for the first time in 3 years, she dared to wonder what would happen if she decided to stop pretending. 2 days later, back in New York, Helen met Bianca at a charming cafe in Greenwich Village, far from the prying eyes of Manhattan's high society. It was a small, cozy place, frequented by artists and intellectuals where they could talk without fear of being overheard by acquaintances. "You've been different since Miami," Bianca observed, stirring sugar into her coffee. "More thoughtful, if that's even possible." Helen sighed, looking out the window at the bustling street. Young people hurried past, each living their own life, making their own choices, being the masters of their own destiny. When was the last time she had made a choice that was truly her own? "Bianca, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course. We're friends. What is it like to be with someone? I mean, truly be with someone?" Bianca stopped stirring her coffee and looked at her intently. "Helen, is this about Edward?" "It's about me, about what I've never had." "I don't understand." Helen took a deep breath. She felt that if she didn't speak now, she might never have the courage again. The cafe was relatively empty, with only a few people at distant tables. Edward and I have never—" She lowered her voice. "We've never been truly intimate." Bianca almost dropped her cup. What do you mean? In 3 years of marriage, he's never touched me. Not once. We sleep in the same bed, but it's as if I'm invisible to him. Helen, are you telling me that you've never... Never, I'm still... Helen couldn't finish the sentence, but Bianca understood. My God, Helen, why did you never tell me this? How could I? It's humiliating. Everyone thinks I have the perfect marriage, the ideal husband. How do I explain that I'm a 27-year-old virgin, married to a man who acts as if I don't exist? Tears began to stream down Helen's face, all the frustrations and pains repressed for 3 years, finally finding an outlet. Bianca immediately got up and sat next to her friend, hugging her. Why do you think he does this? Have you ever talked to him about it? How can I? He barely talks to me about everyday things, let alone this. And what if I press the issue and he decides he doesn't even want me as a wife for show anymore? My family depended on this marriage to get back on their feet. Helen, this isn't right. No woman should live like this. You have a right to be happy, to be loved, to be desired. But I don't even know what that's like, Bea. I don't know what it's like to be touched by someone who desires me. I don't know what it feels like to have someone truly want me. Sometimes I wonder if there's something wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with you. The problem is this whole situation. Helen, you need to make a decision about your life. Helen wiped her tears with a napkin. What decision? Abandon everything. And then what? I have no career, no financial independence. I was raised to be the wife of someone important, not to be myself. You can learn, you can start over. Women have so many more opportunities these days. At 27, with no experience, no specific qualifications, with your education, your intelligence, your connections, Helen, you're underestimating your abilities. Helen shook her head. Bianca didn't understand the complexity of the situation. There were aspects of the marriage, of the families involved, that she herself didn't fully comprehend. Her father had been very clear about the importance of the union with the Montgomerys, but always with a tone that suggested there was more to it than he was willing to explain. There are secrets in my family that I don't fully know, Bianca. The marriage to Edward wasn't just for convenience. There's something more, something my parents never told me properly. What kind of secrets? I don't know. But there are contracts, agreements between the families that go beyond a simple arranged marriage. Sometimes I get the impression that I'm a pawn in a much bigger game. Bianca held her friend's hands firmly. Helen, regardless of your family's secrets, you are a person. You have rights, desires, needs. No one can use you as a game piece without your consent. But what if I already gave my consent when I said I do at the altar? You were 24, under pressure from your family, in a desperate financial situation. That's not free and informed consent. Helen knew her friend was right, but the fear of the unknown was still greater than the courage to change. At least in the life she led, she knew what to expect. Loneliness, frustration, but also security and stability. What if I try to change and fail? What if I find out I can't live on my own? And what if you try and discover you're stronger than you imagine? Helen, you can't be so afraid of freedom that you prefer a gilded cage. Gilded cage. The expression echoed in Helen's mind like a bell. That was exactly what her life had become. A beautiful, comfortable prison, but a prison nonetheless. I need to think, she said finally. I can't make rash decisions that will affect not just me, but my parents, Edward. Okay, but promise me you'll really think about it, not just find excuses to stay as you are. I promise. The two fell silent for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Helen felt both relieved to have finally shared her secret with someone and terrified of the possibilities this confession opened up. At the next table, a middle-aged man was reading a newspaper while drinking coffee. At one point, he folded the paper and stood up to leave. Helen didn't even notice when he passed by her table, but if she had paid attention, she might have recognized the face she had briefly seen at the dinner at the Fontainebleau. Valentin d'Alencourt had overheard every word of the conversation between the two friends, and for the first time in many years, something had sparked a genuine interest in him. Helen Gardner Montgomery was not just another bored, politician's wife. She was an enigma that deserved his full attention. As he walked down the street, Valentine was already planning how he would approach her. patience had always been his greatest virtue when he wanted something. And now he wanted Helen in a way he hadn't felt for a long time. The game had begun. Valentin d'Alencourt had never been a man who left things to chance. At 38, he had transformed the family's pharmaceutical empire into an even greater powerhouse, expanding into biotechnology research and international partnerships. His calculating mind and strategic patience had earned him billions, but they had never given him what he truly desired: total control over something or someone that truly challenged him. Until he heard Helen confess her most intimate secret in that Greenwich Village cafe. Sitting in his office on the top floor of the d'Alencourt building, with a panoramic view of New York City, Valentin mentally organized the information he had collected on Helen over the past few days. His private investigation team was efficient and discreet. In 48 hours, he knew more about her life than many people close to her. Helen Gardner Montgomery, born Helen Gardner Villalobos. Traditional New York family. Fortune built in the textile industry during the 20th century. Dramatic financial downfall when she was 20. Father, Robert Gardner, still held some minor investments. Mother, Gabriela Villalobos Gardner, from a declining aristocratic family. Helen had studied at elite private schools, degree in literature from NYU, but had never worked professionally. The marriage to Edward Montgomery had taken place in a high-profile ceremony at St. Patrick's Cathedral, with full coverage in society magazines. The guest list included influential politicians, business leaders, and the cream of New York society, a union everyone described as perfect, uniting two traditional families. But Valentin knew the behind-the-scenes story was different, very different. His obsession with control had led him to develop an enviable information network over the years. Key people in various sectors of society who, for money or favors, shared valuable information. That's how he discovered aspects of Helen's marriage that not even she knew. The agreement between the Gardner and Montgomery families went far beyond a simple marital union. It involved forgiving debts, transferring properties, and, more interestingly, specific clauses about inheritance and succession that would only activate under certain circumstances. Edward Montgomery, for his part, was a man with his own dark secrets. A graduate of Harvard Law, he had built his political career on an image of traditional family and conservative values. But there were episodes in his past that explained a lot about his behavior with Helen. Valentin opened a specific folder on his computer. Photos of Helen at various social events appeared on the screen. In all of them, she was radiant, elegant, smiling. But he had learned to read expressions, body language. In every photo where she appeared with Edward, there was a subtle tension, a distance that the smiles couldn't hide. She was beautiful, no doubt. Dark brown hair that shone under the event lights, expressive green eyes, a perfectly sculpted body enhanced by designer dresses. But it wasn't just her physical beauty that attracted him. It was the vulnerability he had perceived in that confession at the cafe. The repressed sexual frustration, the emotional loneliness, the desire to be seen, touched, wanted. Helen was an adult woman with a woman's needs, but living in a state of forced purity that was destroying her from the inside. And Valentin wanted to be the one to free her from this prison, but in a way that would place her under his control. The intercom buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. d'Alencourt, Mr. Marcus Stone has arrived for the meeting." "Send him in." Marcus Stone had been his private investigator for over 10 years. A former federal agent, he had developed unorthodox methods to obtain information that interested Valentin. He was discreet, efficient, and well paid enough to maintain absolute loyalty. "I brought what you asked for," Marcus said, placing a folder on the desk. "Helen Montgomery's social calendar for the next few weeks, the places she frequents regularly, the people she maintains close contact with." Valentin opened the folder and examined the documents. Helen had a relatively predictable routine: Pilates classes 3 times a week, charity luncheons, art exhibitions, social dinners with her husband. But there were also personal moments: regular meetings with Bianca Rogers, visits to her parents, therapy sessions with a psychologist in Tribeca. Therapy? Valentin raised an eyebrow. For 6 months. Dr. Francis Lopez, a specialist in marital issues and relationships. The sessions are weekly. Interesting. Helen was seeking professional help, which meant her dissatisfaction had reached a critical point. Valentine mentally filed away this information. And about Edward Montgomery. Did you get more details about his past? Marcus's expression grew more serious. That was more complicated. The official records have been well cleaned over the years, but I managed to talk to some people who were in college with him. There are rumors about an incident when he was 22, something involving a girlfriend at the time. What kind of incident? Sexual assault. The story was hushed up. The girl's family received a considerable sum not to press charges. Edward went abroad right after, spent 2 years there getting his master's degree. Valentine processed the information. Edward had traumas related to sexuality that could explain his inability to be intimate with Helen. It wasn't physical impotence, but a psychological barrier that prevented him from connecting with a woman. Keep monitoring. I want to know about any changes in their routine. There's one more thing. Marcus hesitated. Her friend, Bianca Rogers. There's something strange about her too. Explain. She's not just an independent art curator as she appears. She has connections with powerful people, receives bank transfers from unidentified sources, and there are records of her meeting with Edward Montgomery that Helen apparently doesn't know about. Valentine leaned forward, interested. What kind of meetings? Lunches, conversations, in discreet places, always when Helen has other commitments. It could just be friendship, but you suspect there's more. It's possible Bianca is reporting information about Helen to someone, maybe to Edward himself, maybe to other people. The plot grew more interesting with each revelation. Helen was not only trapped in a loveless marriage, but also potentially being betrayed by the one person she truly trusted. Keep investigating, and prepare a report on the contemporary art exhibition opening at the Whitney next week. Helen will be there. After Marcus left, Valentine went back to analyzing the photos of Helen. In one of them, she was at a similar exhibition, observing a painting with an absorbed expression. There was something in her gaze that suggested an artistic, sensitive soul, imprisoned in a life that did not fulfill her. He picked up the phone and dialed a number. "Robert, it's Valentine. I need you to get me an invitation to the opening at the Whitney next Thursday." "Yes, I know it's hard to get. That's why I'm calling you." "Excellent. And Robert? Also arrange for me to be introduced as an investor interested in contemporary American art." Robert Costa was one of Valentine's many useful contacts in New York society. A gallery owner, he had free access to the city's artistic and social circuits. The strategy was forming in his mind. He couldn't just approach Helen directly. She was a married woman, with a reputation to uphold, embedded in a society that watched every move. He needed a context that would justify his presence and interest. Art would be the perfect pretext. Helen showed a genuine interest in culture, attending exhibitions even when Edward didn't accompany her. It would be natural for a collector like him to meet her in these settings. Over the next few days, Valentine prepared meticulously. He studied contemporary American artists, memorized information about techniques and artistic movements, and even bought a few pieces by artists who would be represented in the exhibition. When the time came, he would be able to hold an intelligent conversation about any aspect of the show. On Thursday night, he arrived at the Whitney Museum wearing an impeccably tailored Italian suit, understated but definitely noticeable. The event was crowded as expected. The New York cultural elite mingled with business leaders interested in investing in art and socialites looking for sophisticated entertainment. Helen arrived promptly at 8, accompanied by Bianca. Edward was not present. According to Valentine's information, he was in D.C. for important votes in the House. Helen wore an elegant black dress, discreet but highlighting her natural beauty. Her hair was in a low bun, with soft makeup and pearl earrings, the personification of understated elegance. Valentine observed from a distance for almost half an hour, studying her movements, her reactions to the artworks, the way she interacted with Bianca and other acquaintances. Helen seemed genuinely interested in the exhibition. stopping for long periods in front of certain paintings, reading the descriptions attentively. It was when she moved away from Bianca to observe a series of canvases on urban loneliness by herself that Valentine made his move. Impressive how this artist manages to capture the melancholy of modern life, don't you think? He said, approaching casually. Helen turned, slightly surprised to be addressed by a stranger, but the intelligent comment about the work and Valentine's respectful demeanor put her at ease. Yes, there's a very strong emotional depth in his work. This series specifically, it's as if each canvas is a reflection of feelings we recognize but can't easily express. Exactly. Art has that unique ability to give form to what is abstract within us. Valentine extended his hand. Valentine Dalancourt, I'm an admirer of contemporary American art. Helen Montgomery, she shook his hand briefly, I also greatly appreciate this movement. The first physical contact between them was exactly as Valentine had anticipated. Brief, formal, but Helen didn't pull her hand away immediately. For a split second, she seemed to register the warmth and firmness of his grip. Do you collect? She asked, turning back to the paintings. I started a few years ago, mainly emerging American artists. I believe our country produces a unique art in the world, with a sensibility that reflects our cultural complexity. It was a prepared answer, but delivered with enough sincerity to sound natural. Helen nodded, clearly interested in the conversation. It's rare to find collectors who truly understand the works they acquire, and don't just buy them as an investment or for status. Art without emotional understanding is just expensive decoration, Valentine agreed. For me, a piece needs to awaken something internal. It needs to have a dialogue with the observer. They walked through the exhibition together, commenting on the works. Valentine was careful not to monopolize the conversation, asking questions that allowed Helen to express her opinions and knowledge. He discovered that she had a keen artistic sensibility and substantial knowledge of American art. Did you study art? He asked at one point. Literature at NYU, but I've always been interested in visual arts. It's a form of escape, I would say. Escape from what? Helen hesitated, as if she had said more than she intended. From the everyday. Life can be very predictable sometimes. It was a subtle but significant opening. Valentine mentally noted the comment but didn't press the issue. I understand perfectly. My corporate routine can be suffocating. Art reminds me that there is beauty and depth beyond numbers and business strategies. Bianca approached at that moment, clearly curious about Helen's new companion. Bianca, I'd like you to meet Valentine Dalancourt. Valentine, this is my friend Bianca Rogers, an art curator. A pleasure, Valentine said, greeting Bianca. Something in her gaze immediately alerted him. It was an evaluative, almost suspicious look, as if she were trying to decipher him. Dalancourt, the name is familiar. Aren't you from the Laboratories family? Bianca asked. I am, but my interest here today is purely artistic, not business. Bianca nodded, but Valentine noticed she continued to watch him with special attention. He decided it was best not to prolong the first encounter too much. It was a pleasure meeting you both. Helen, I hope our paths cross again at other cultural events. Certainly, Helen replied, and Valentine noted that she seemed genuinely interested in the possibility. He walked away, but not before mentally registering the thoughtful expression Helen assumed as Bianca began to ask her questions about him. In the following days, Valentine put the second phase of his plan into action. Through Robert Costa, he learned that Helen regularly frequented a smaller gallery in Chelsea, where she used to go on Tuesday afternoons to visit more intimate exhibitions. The following Tuesday, he showed up at the gallery as if by coincidence. Helen was alone, observing photographs by a young artist depicting the city's outer boroughs. What a pleasant coincidence, he said, approaching her. Helen turned and smiled, seeming genuinely happy to see him. Valentine, I didn't expect to find you here. This gallery is a recent discovery for me. A friend recommended this photographer's work. And you? Are you a regular? I come, here from time to time. It's more intimate than the big events, more authentic. They spent an hour talking about art, literature, music. Valentine discovered that Helen had sophisticated tastes and well-formed opinions on various cultural subjects. He also noticed that she seemed more relaxed when she was away from the formal social environment. "Do you like classical music?" he asked when she mentioned having recently attended a concert. "I love it. It's one of my secret passions." "Secret?" Helen blushed slightly. "My husband finds classical music boring, so I usually go alone or with Bianca." It was another small revelation about the incompatibilities in her marriage. Valentine stored the information. "There's a concert by the New York Philharmonic next week, Brahms and Rachmaninoff. If you're interested." "That would be wonderful," Helen replied, almost immediately, then seemed to realize the implication of the invitation. "I mean, it would be interesting, but—" "Of course, I understand. A married woman needs to be cautious about who she's seen with in public." Helen stared at him, surprised by his frankness. Valentine had calculated this exact reaction. "It's not that. Well, maybe it's partly that. It's complicated. It's all right. It was just a friendly invitation from someone who appreciates good music, but I understand your concerns." Valentine said a polite goodbye, leaving Helen with the feeling that she might have missed an interesting opportunity. It was exactly what he wanted. He had planted the seed of doubt, of what if. Over the weekend, Helen couldn't stop thinking about the invitation to the concert. She discussed it with her therapist during her Friday session. "Why do you think you were so bothered by the invitation?" asked Dr. Lopez. Because it was the first time in a long time that someone invited me to something I would genuinely like to do." "And what's the problem with that?" "It's that he's a single man, I'm married, and I wanted to accept. Badly." It was the first time Helen admitted to herself that she was attracted to another man. The guilt she felt was immense, but there was also something liberating in this admission. The following Monday, Helen was leaving a Pilates class when she ran into Valentine by chance on the street. In fact, he had discovered her gym through Marcus and timed his presence to coincide with her schedule. "Helen, what a coincidence," he said, carrying a few shopping bags from a nearby bookstore he had specifically visited to justify his presence there. "Valentine, hello." She seemed happy, but slightly embarrassed to see him. "About the concert invitation. I hope I wasn't inappropriate. I didn't mean to put you in an awkward situation." "It wasn't inappropriate. I just need to be careful." "Of course. But please know that if you ever want company for cultural events, as friends who share similar interests, I'm available, with no intention other than enjoying good art in good company." Helen studied him for a moment. There was something about Valentine that attracted her beyond his appearance or education. It was the way he truly listened to her when she spoke, how he treated her opinions with respect, how he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her as a person. "When is the concert again?" she asked suddenly. "Saturday, 8 o'clock, Carnegie Hall. Edward will be traveling this weekend. Maybe I can go. As friends." Valentine smiled, but internally he felt a much more intense satisfaction. "It would be a pleasure. Shall I pick you up, or would you prefer we meet there?" "Better to meet there, 7:45? "Perfect." When they parted, both knew that something had changed. Helen was officially crossing a line she had imposed on herself for 3 years of marriage, and Valentine was taking the first real step toward what he had planned for her. The game had evolved to a new level. The concert was a watershed moment in Helen's life. Sitting next to Valentine at Carnegie Hall, she experienced for the first time in years a sensation she had forgotten existed, that of being truly alive. The music of Brahms echoed through the historic theatre, but Helen was more aware of the masculine presence beside her than of the notes flowing from the instruments. Valentine had chosen their seats strategically, close enough that they could talk discreetly during intermissions, but in a section where they were unlikely to run into acquaintances from her social circle. He wore an elegant dark suit and a subtle cologne that reached her whenever he leaned in to make a comment about the music. "Rachmaninoff always moves me in a way I can't explain," she murmured during the performance of Piano Concerto No. 2. "It's the emotional intensity. He composed as if every note carried a piece of his soul. Valentine replied, his voice low and close to her ear. Helen felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the theatre's temperature. It was the first time in 3 years that a man had spoken so close to her that she had felt the warmth of someone's breath on her skin. The sensation was so unexpected and intense that she had to concentrate to not show the impact that simple gesture had on her. During the intermission, they walked through the ornate corridors of the theatre, talking about music, the musicians, the experience of being there. Valentine was an exceptional conversationalist, alternating between intelligent observations and comfortable silences that allowed Helen to simply exist without the pressure of playing a role. "You seem different tonight," he observed when they returned to their seats for the second half of the concert. "Different how?" "More present, as if you're really here, not just physically." The observation hit her unexpectedly. It was exactly how she felt, present in her own life for the first time in a long time. With Edward, a part of her was always on autopilot, playing the role of the ideal wife. With Valentine, she felt she could simply be Helen. When the concert ended and they walked out together into the New York night, Helen felt a genuine reluctance to say goodbye. The evening was pleasant, the city lights had a special energy, and Valentine's company had been more engaging than any social event she had attended in recent years. "Would you like to get some coffee? I know a discreet place that stays open late," Valentine offered, as if he had read her mind. Helen hesitated for only a moment. That would be nice. The cafe Valentine chose was on a quiet street near the theatre district, frequented by musicians and artists leaving the area's theatres. It was intimate without being overly romantic, sophisticated without being pretentious, the perfect place for a deeper conversation. Seated at a corner table with the soft lighting creating a cozy atmosphere, Helen allowed herself to relax in a way she hadn't in months. Valentine ordered a single malt scotch. She opted for a Portuguese red wine. "May I ask a personal question?" Valentine said after a few minutes of casual conversation. Helen tensed slightly but nodded. "Are you happy?" The question caught her, completely off guard. It was so direct, so simple, yet so complex that she didn't know how to respond immediately. "That's a very direct question. I apologize if I was indelicate. But there's something about you, a sadness you carry that's almost palpable, as if you're carrying a weight no one else can see." Helen felt tears welling up in her eyes. How could a complete stranger read her so well when her own husband didn't even see her? "It's complicated," she said finally. "The best things in life usually are." Helen took a sip of her wine, gathering her thoughts. Part of her wanted to open up completely, to tell him about the loneliness, the empty marriage, the feeling of wasting her life. But the rational part knew it would be too dangerous. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life," she confessed partially, "as if I stepped into a life that doesn't belong to me and now I don't know how to get out." "And do you want to get out?" The question hung in the air between them. Helen looked into Valentine's eyes and saw something she wasn't used to seeing when men looked at her. Genuine interest, not just in her appearance or her social status, but in her as a person. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but it's not as simple as just wanting to." "Because of your husband?" "Because of everything. Family, expectations, responsibilities. You can't understand the complexity of my situation." "Perhaps not, but I can understand the feeling of being trapped in a life we didn't truly choose." There was something in Valentine's voice that suggested personal experience with the topic. Helen looked at him with curiosity. "Have you ever felt that way?" "For years. I took over the family business at 25, when my father died. I spent more than a decade living up to his expectations, building on what he had created, maintaining traditions that weren't mine. Only recently have I started making decisions based on what I truly want." "And what do you want?" Valentine looked directly into her eyes before answering. "Authentic things, real people, experiences that truly matter." The intensity of his gaze made Helen feel as if he were seeing right through all the protective layers she had built around herself. It was both terrifying and thrilling. "It's late," she said suddenly, looking at her watch. "I should go." "Of course, let me take you home." No, thank you, I'd rather call a car service. Valentine didn't insist, but Helen noticed a slight disappointment in his expression. She felt disappointed too, but she knew she was treading on dangerous ground. Helen, he said as she stood to leave, thank you for this evening. It was special. The word special echoed in Helen's mind all the way home. When she arrived at the Upper East Side apartment, Edward had not yet returned from his trip. The house was empty, silent, cold, a stark contrast to the energy and warmth she had felt all night. Lying in the empty bed, Helen couldn't sleep. She kept reliving moments from the evening, Valentine's proximity during the concert, the way he truly listened when she spoke, the genuine interest he showed in her thoughts and feelings, and most of all she kept thinking about the question he had asked, "Are you happy?" The obvious answer was no, but admitting that, even to herself, opened up a range of questions she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The next morning, Edward returned from D.C. in a better mood than usual. The votes had been favorable to the bills he supported, and he was excited about the political prospects for the rest of the year. "How was your weekend?" he asked during breakfast, flipping through the newspapers as usual. "Quiet. I went to a concert last night." "Oh, really? By yourself?" Helen hesitated for only a fraction of a second. "I ran into Bianca there." The lie came out naturally, but she felt guilty immediately. It was the first time she had directly lied to Edward about something significant. "Good that you had fun," he said, already focused on a political article. The ease with which Edward accepted her explanation, without any further curiosity, only reinforced how disconnected he was from her life. If he were a husband interested in his wife, he would have asked more questions, shown genuine interest in how she had spent her evening. But to Edward, she was just part of the structure of his life, not a person whose feelings or experiences mattered. Over the next few days, Helen found herself constantly thinking about Valentine. She replayed every conversation, every moment of closeness, every look they had exchanged. It was as if a part of her that had been dormant for years had finally awakened. Bianca noticed the change during one of their regular lunches. "You're different," she observed, studying her friend across the table. "More luminous, I'd say." "Am I?" Helen tried to sound casual. "Definitely. Did something good happen?" Helen almost told her about Valentine, but something stopped her. Perhaps it was the memory of the investigation Marcus had revealed about the secret meetings between Bianca and Edward. Or perhaps it was just the instinct to protect something that was still very fragile and new. "Nothing specific. Maybe the therapy is starting to work." Bianca seemed to accept the explanation, but Helen noticed that she continued to watch her with special attention throughout the lunch. It was that same week that Helen finally decided to confront Edward about aspects of their marriage that had been bothering her for a long time. Not about the lack of intimacy, she didn't have the courage for that yet, but about the emotional distance between them. Edward was in his home office, working on speeches for the coming week, when Helen knocked on the door. "Can I talk to you?" "Of course, come in." He saved the document on his computer and turned to her. "What is it?" Helen sat in the armchair across from his desk, trying to find the right words. "I'd like us to talk more. About us, about what we feel, about our plans." Edward frowned, clearly disconcerted by the topic. "Is there something specific bothering you?" "It's just that sometimes I feel like we're just roommates who share a social life, not a real couple." Edward's expression changed immediately. He became visibly uncomfortable, starting to nervously shuffle papers on his desk. "Helen, our marriage works well, we're compatible, we have similar goals, we respect each other. But what about feelings and intimacy and emotional connection?" Edward stood up abruptly, turning his back to her and looking out the window. "Not all marriages need to be intensely emotional to work. We have stability, partnership, mutual respect." "But I need more than that, Edward. I need to feel seen, heard, desired." The word desired made Edward turn sharply toward her with an expression that mixed anger and some kind of fear. "Desired? Helen, you're my wife. Not some, not some mistress who needs to be constantly seduced. The harshness of his response shocked her. It was the first time Edward had spoken to her in an aggressive tone. I didn't say anything about seduction. I'm talking about connection, about emotional and physical intimacy. Physical? Edward repeated the word, as if she had said something obscene. Helen, we're not teenagers. Mature marriages are built on things more solid than physical impulses. Physical impulses? Edward, we're talking about normal intimacy between a married couple. It's something natural, expected. Natural? Edward laughed bitterly. There's nothing natural about it. It's a loss of control, an unnecessary vulnerability. Helen looked at him with growing understanding. It wasn't just indifference or lack of attraction. There was something deeply disturbed in Edward's attitude towards sexuality. Edward, do you have a problem with physical intimacy in general? He turned back to the window, his shoulders tense. I don't have a problem. I just think there are more important things in life than that. But his body language said otherwise. Helen stood up and approached him cautiously. If there's something in your past that's affecting our present life, we can talk about it, or seek professional help together. There's nothing in my past, he said sharply, and we don't need professional help. Our marriage is working perfectly as it is. It's not working for me. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Edward finally turned to her, but his face was completely closed off. Helen, when we got married, you knew what kind of man I was. I was always direct about my priorities: career, stability, building a solid future. If you were expecting something different, I was expecting a husband, not a business partner. And you have a husband who protects you, respects you, offers you security and stability. Isn't that enough? Helen looked at him, truly seeing the man she had married for the first time. Edward wasn't just emotionally distant. There was something broken in him, something that prevented him from connecting intimately with anyone. No, she said finally, it's not enough. Edward returned to his desk and opened his laptop, clearly signaling that the conversation was over. Then perhaps you need to reevaluate your expectations of marriage. Helen left the office feeling more alone than ever, but also with a new clarity about her situation. Edward would never be able to give her what she needed. The question that remained was, what would she do with this information? That same night, alone in her room, Helen picked up her phone and before she lost her nerve, typed a message to Valentine. Thank you again for the wonderful evening at the concert. I'd love to do it again sometime. The reply came within minutes. It would be a pleasure. There's an interesting photography exhibition opening at the Fortes Villasa Gallery on Wednesday. Would you be interested? Helen stared at the message for several minutes before replying, Yes? What time? She was officially crossing a line from which she might not be able to return. But for the first time, in years, she didn't care about the consequences. The Fortes Villasa Gallery was buzzing on the night of the exhibition opening. Helen arrived promptly at 7, wearing an emerald green dress that enhanced her eyes and made her feel more confident. In the days since her devastating conversation with Edward, she had made a conscious decision to stop hiding behind discreet clothes and restrained behavior. Valentine was already waiting when she arrived, elegant as always in a navy blazer over a crisp white shirt. But it was the way his eyes lit up when he saw her that made Helen's heart race. You look stunning, he said, lightly kissing her hand in greeting. It was an old-fashioned, gentle gesture, but it sent a wave of electricity up Helen's arm. Edward never greeted her like that, never made her feel special or desired. The exhibition promises to be interesting, she replied, trying to maintain her composure. As they walked through the gallery, observing photographs that explored human intimacy in urban settings, Helen felt more relaxed than she had in weeks. Valentine's presence had a calming yet energizing effect on her. This series on loneliness touches me deeply, Helen commented, stopping in front of a photograph showing a woman alone in a crowd. Why? Valentine asked, genuinely interested in her opinion. Because it's possible to be surrounded by people and still feel completely isolated. It's possible to be in a life that looks perfect on the outside and feel like you're dying on the inside. Valentine studied her for a moment before replying. Are you talking about the photograph or your own experience? The direct question caught her off guard, but unlike other times, Helen decided to be honest. Maybe a little of both. They continued talking as they walked through the exhibition, but now there was an added layer of intimacy to their interactions. Helen felt seen by Valentine in a way she had never experienced before. It was while they were looking at a series of photographs about couples that Helen noticed a familiar figure across the gallery. Bianca was talking animatedly with a man Helen recognized as an influential politician from DC. Something in Bianca's body language suggested it was more than a casual conversation. Do you know someone here? Valentine asked, following her gaze. My friend Bianca, she's over there talking to... Actually, I don't know who that man is. Valentine looked in the indicated direction, and Helen noticed a subtle change in his expression. That's Roger Villalobos, senator from Florida. Villalobos, Helen frowned. That's my mother's maiden name. An interesting coincidence, Valentine commented, but his voice had taken on a more observant tone. Helen continued to watch Bianca and the senator. There was something in the interaction between them that bothered her, a familiarity that suggested previous meetings. When Bianca finally noticed her presence, there was a moment of hesitation before she waved in her direction. Helen, what a surprise to see you here, Bianca said, approaching, with the senator. Bianca, imagine that. You didn't tell me you were coming to the exhibition. It was a last-minute thing. Let me introduce Senator Roger Villalobos. Roger, this is my dear friend Helen Montgomery. The senator greeted Helen with excessive politeness, but she noticed his eyes studying her with special interest, as if he were evaluating something. Montgomery. Are you married to Congressman Edward Montgomery? Yes. An excellent lawmaker. We've been working together on some important projects. Helen introduced Valentin, and she noticed that both Bianca and the senator reacted to the name d'Alencourt with immediate recognition. D'Alencourt Laboratories, the senator said. I met your father years ago, a visionary man. The conversation continued for a few minutes, but Helen felt a strangeness in the air. There were subtexts in the lines, glances exchanged between Bianca and the senator that she couldn't decipher. When they finally parted, Valentine was quieter than usual. Is something wrong? Helen asked. Not wrong exactly, just interesting. Your friend seems to have deeper political connections than she lets on. What do you mean? Roger Villalobos isn't just a senator. He has influence in very specific circles, involved with the regulation of the pharmaceutical and healthcare sectors, if your friend is in close contact with him. Valentine didn't complete the sentence, but Helen understood the implication. Bianca was involved in political networking far more sophisticated than an art curator would need. Maybe it's just a coincidence. She knows a lot of people through her work with art. Maybe, Valentine agreed, but his tone suggested skepticism. The rest of the evening passed in a slightly more tense atmosphere. Helen couldn't stop thinking about the strange interaction with Bianca and the senator. There were secrets there that she didn't understand, and it bothered her deeply. When Valentine walked her to the gallery entrance to say goodbye, he hesitated before speaking. Helen, can I give you a piece of advice? Of course. Be careful who you trust. People aren't always who they seem to be. Are you talking about Bianca? I'm speaking generally, but yes, your friend gave me a peculiar impression. Helen felt torn between loyalty to her childhood friend and the growing trust she was placing in Valentine. Bianca has been my friend for 20 years. She's the only person I can talk to about everything. Everything? Valentine looked directly into her eyes. Did you tell her about our meetings? The question made her stop and think. No, she hadn't. She had lied to Bianca about the concert, just as she had lied to Edward. Why was she protecting her emerging relationship with Valentine, even from her best friend? I haven't told her, she admitted. And why not? Helen didn't know how to answer immediately. Was it instinct? Fear? Or did some part of her distrust Bianca more than she was willing to admit? I don't know. Maybe because I'm still trying to understand what's happening between us. Valentine nodded, seeming to understand. When you're ready to understand, I'll be here. He said goodbye with a gentle kiss on her forehead, a gesture that was both respectful and intimate. Helen watched him walk away, feeling a mixture of desire and confusion. In the following days, Helen couldn't stop thinking about Valentine's words about Bianca. She began to notice small details that had previously gone unnoticed. Bianca's expensive clothes, always from brands an independent curator could hardly afford, the detailed knowledge of politics she occasionally displayed, the way she always asked subtle questions about Edward's personal and professional life. During her therapy session that week, Helen decided to address the issue. Dr. Lopez, how can we know if we truly know the people close to us? An interesting question. Was there something specific that prompted it? I've been questioning some friendships, wondering if people are really who they seem to be. And what made you start questioning this? Helen hesitated. How could she explain that she was developing feelings for another man and that this man had planted seeds of doubt about her best friend? I've recently started noticing inconsistencies in the behavior of people close to me. Little things that don't make sense when you stop to analyze them. Give me an example. A close friend who seems to have financial resources incompatible with her stated profession, who demonstrates knowledge of subjects she shouldn't know deeply, who asks subtle but constant questions about my personal life. Dr. Lopez leaned forward, interested. Did these observations arise recently, or have they always been there? They've always been there, but I chose to ignore them. Now, I'm paying more attention. And what changed that made you start paying more attention? Helen knew the answer, but she wasn't ready to verbalize it. Valentine had changed. Meeting him had awakened a part of her that was asleep, including the ability to observe and question. Maybe I've matured, or maybe I've started to value myself more. Valuing yourself more is fundamental for healthy relationships. When we value ourselves, we naturally begin to question relationships that don't nurture us or that may be harmful. After the session, Helen felt more determined to find out the truth about Bianca. If her childhood friend was hiding important aspects of her life, she had the right to know. The following week, Helen decided to run a test. She called Bianca and said that Edward would be traveling and she'd like some company to try a new Japanese restaurant in Tribeca. I'd love to, darling, but I can't today. I have an unavoidable work commitment. What kind of commitment? Maybe we can reschedule for later. It's a meeting with private collectors, boring stuff, discussions about acquisitions and budgets. Helen accepted the explanation and hung up, but decided to investigate further. She drove to Tribeca and parked in a position where she could watch the Japanese restaurant she had suggested. If Bianca really had a work commitment, she wouldn't show up there. At 8 o'clock in the evening, exactly the time they had originally planned, Helen saw Bianca arrive at the restaurant, but she wasn't alone. Edward was with her. The shock was so great that Helen had to grip the steering wheel to keep from losing control. Her best friend and her husband were meeting secretly at the exact time she had proposed a dinner with Bianca. Helen remained in the car for over 2 hours, watching. Bianca and Edward talked intensely throughout the dinner. It didn't look like a romantic encounter, but it was definitely an intimate and conspiratorial meeting. When they finally parted, Helen followed them discreetly. Edward went home, but Bianca headed to a luxurious residential building in the Flatiron district. Helen noted the address. Back at the apartment, Edward was in his office, as always. Helen knocked on the door, her heart pounding. "How was your evening?" he asked casually, without looking up from his papers. "Productive. And yours?" "Working. Preparing material for an important meeting tomorrow." He was lying, just as Bianca had lied. The two people Helen trusted most were conspiring behind her back. "Edward, is there something you need to tell me?" He finally looked at her, and Helen saw a flicker of something, guilt, fear, cross his eyes before he regained his composure. "About what?" "About you and Bianca." Edward froze for a moment, then slowly closed the folder of documents. "What do you mean by that?" "You meet regularly, in secret. I want to know why." Edward stood up, turning his back to her. "Helen, you're imagining things." "I'm not imagining anything. I saw you having dinner together 2 hours ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Edward remained with his back to her for almost a full minute before turning around. "All right. Yes, I talk to Bianca occasionally. She's your best friend. It's natural that we communicate about matters concerning you." "What matters?" "Your well-being, your emotional stability. Bianca has been worried about some changes in your behavior recently." Helen felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. "What changes?" "You've been more distant, questioning. Bianca thought I should know." The betrayal was worse than Helen had imagined. Bianca wasn't just secretly meeting with Edward. She was reporting on her, analyzing her behavior, reporting her changes. "How long has this been going on?" Edward hesitated. "Since the beginning of our marriage, Bianca has always been a consultant on matters related to you." "A spy, you mean? A concerned friend who wants what's best for you?" Helen laughed bitterly. "And what do you two think is best for me?" "Stability, security, keeping the marriage working." "Working for whom? Because it's definitely not working for me." Edward sat back down, looking tired. "Helen, there are aspects of our life, of our families, that you don't fully understand." "Then explain them to me." "It's not that simple." "Try." Edward looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing how much he could reveal. "Your marriage to me wasn't just to save your family from bankruptcy. It was part of a larger agreement, involving political and business matters that extend far beyond us." "What kind of agreement?" "Agreements between influential families about spheres of operation, political influence, government contracts. Your father was in debt not just financially, but politically. There were commitments he had made and couldn't fulfill." Helen felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "Commitments to whom?" "To powerful people. People who don't take defaults or betrayals lightly." "And I was offered as payment?" "You were offered as collateral for a lasting alliance. Your marriage to me sealed agreements that protect your family to this day." Helen sank into an armchair, trying to process the information. "And Bianca? What's her role in all this?" "Bianca is an intermediary. She monitors situations, reports instabilities, ensures that all parties involved are upholding their parts of the agreements." "How long has she been doing this?" "Since before our marriage. In fact, it was through her that your family was presented as a viable option for our union." The sense of betrayal was so intense that Helen felt physically sick. Her entire life had been a carefully orchestrated sham by people she thought loved her. "And what if I want a divorce?" Edward looked at her with a mixture of pity and firmness. "That's not an option, Helen. The agreements are much bigger than us. There are consequences that go far beyond our personal relationship." "What kind of consequences?" "For your family, total ruin. For my career, the end. And for you." Edward hesitated. "For me, what?" "There are clauses in the contracts that ensure you will remain under our protection as long as the marriage lasts. If the marriage ends—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Helen understood she was being subtly threatened. That night, lying in bed next to a husband she now knew was her jailer, Helen made the most important decision of her life. No matter the threats, the secret agreements, or the consequences, she would find a way to break free, and Valentin d'Alencourt would be her only ally on this journey. Helen didn't sleep that night. She lay beside Edward, pretending to be asleep, while her mind processed the devastating revelations about her life. Every detail of her existence had been carefully manipulated by people she trusted. Her marriage, her friendship with Bianca, even aspects of her personality, everything had been shaped to serve the interests of others. As the sun began to rise, Helen made a decision that would change everything. She waited for Edward to leave for work and then picked up her phone with trembling hands. She typed a message to Valentin before she lost her nerve. "I need to see you, urgently. Can I come to your place?" The reply came within minutes. "Of course. I'll send the address." Valentin's apartment was a penthouse on Central Park West, with a panoramic view of the city. When Helen arrived, he greeted her, personally, dismissing the staff and ensuring they had complete privacy. "Did something happen?" he asked, immediately noticing her emotional state. Helen collapsed onto the sofa in the spacious living room and began to tell him everything. About Bianca and Edward meeting secretly, about the family agreements that had determined her marriage, about being treated as a pawn in a political game she didn't understand. Valentine listened in silence, his expression growing progressively darker as she revealed the details. "Helen," he said finally, "there are things about this situation you need to know." "What do you mean?" Valentine stood up and walked to the window, gathering his thoughts before speaking. "I didn't meet you by chance in that cafe. I was there because I knew you would be." Helen stared at him, confused. "I don't understand." "I knew you before we officially met. I had investigated your life, your marital situation, the agreements between the families. When I heard you confessing to Bianca about your virginity, about your loneliness, I decided I wanted you." Helen's initial shock quickly turned to anger. "You were spying on me?" "Yes." Valentine's brutal honesty caught her off guard. She had expected denial or elaborate explanations. "Why?" "Because you intrigued me in a way no woman had before, and because I knew you were being used by people who were supposed to protect you." "And you thought you could use me too?" Valentine turned to her, his dark eyes intense. "At first, maybe, but something changed." "What?" "You. Getting to know the real you changed everything for me." Helen stood up, pacing the room as she processed the information. Everyone in her life was lying to her, manipulating her, using her for their own ends. Even Valentine had begun his approach with questionable motives. "How can I trust you after this?" "You can't," he admitted, "but I can offer you something no one else in your life is offering." "What?" "The truth. Always. And the choice to get out of this situation if that's what you want." Helen stopped in front of him. "And if I want to get out? If I want to divorce Edward and start my life over? I have the resources to protect you and your family from the consequences. I have enough influence to neutralize the threats Edward mentioned." "Why would you do that?" Valentine gently held her face in his, hands forcing her to look directly into his eyes. "Because I fell in love with you, for real. Not with the idea of possessing you or controlling you, but with the strong, intelligent, and vulnerable woman you are." Helen felt tears begin to stream down her face. It was the first time in her adult life that someone had declared their love for her so directly and intensely. "Valentine, I know it's complicated. I know you have every reason not to trust me. But Helen, what do you feel when you're with me?" She closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the truth of what she had been trying to deny for weeks. "I feel alive," she whispered. "I feel seen, desired, important." "Then stay with me today, not as part of a plan or a strategy, simply because it's what you want." Helen opened her eyes and looked at Valentine. In that moment, all moral considerations, all possible consequences, all fears disappeared. There was only her, him, and the intensity of what she felt. "I want to," she said, her voice low but determined. The kiss that followed was unlike any experience Helen had ever imagined. It wasn't gentle, or hesitant, but intense, hungry, desperate. Years of sexual and emotional frustration poured into that moment of connection. Valentine led her to his bedroom, stopping occasionally along the way to kiss her against the walls, his hands exploring her body through her clothes. Helen felt as if she were waking from a 3-year coma, each of Valentine's touches bringing sensations she had never experienced. In the bedroom, he stopped and looked at her intensely. "Are you sure? There's no going back after this?" "I'm sure," she replied without hesitation. Valentine began to undress her slowly, revealing her body as if he were discovering a treasure. Every kiss, every caress was done with an intensity that made Helen tremble. "You're beautiful," he murmured, looking at her completely naked for the first time. "More beautiful than I imagined." Helen felt vulnerable, but not ashamed. For the first time in her life, she felt truly desired by someone. When Valentine laid her on the bed and began to explore her body with kisses and caresses, Helen discovered sensations she didn't even know existed. He was patient yet determined, leading her to states of pleasure that made her writhe and moan in ways she had never imagined. "Let yourself feel," he whispered when she tried to control herself. "Don't hide anything from me." When they finally came together, Helen experienced an initial pain that quickly transformed into intense pleasure. Valentine moved with a combination of passion and care that made her understand for the first time what it meant to truly make love. They spent hours exploring each other, alternating between moments of animalistic intensity and surprising tenderness. Helen discovered that her body was capable of pleasures that surpassed any fantasy she had created during years of frustration. When they finally collapsed together, exhausted and satisfied, Helen felt fundamentally transformed. It wasn't just the physical loss of her virginity, but a complete change in how she saw herself as a woman. "How do you feel?" Valentine asked, stroking her hair as she rested on his chest. "Different. Complete. Like I've finally found myself." "And now?" Helen knew he was asking about the future, about the decisions she would have to make, but in that moment, she didn't want to think about consequences. "Now, I want to stay here forever," she said, kissing his chest. Valentine laughed softly. "I would love that. But we know it's more complicated." Helen propped herself up on her elbow and faced him. "Help me get out of this life, Valentine. Help me be truly free." "There will be consequences, Helen. For you, for your family, for Edward. It won't be easy." "I don't care. Today you showed me what it's like to be truly alive. I can't go back to that prison now." Valentine held her face gently. "Then we'll do this together. But we need to be smart about how we proceed." They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans. Valentine explained that he had evidence of irregularities in the family agreements that could be used to neutralize some of the threats. He also had contacts who could protect Helen's family from retaliation. "And Edward?" Helen asked. "Edward has his own secrets he would prefer to keep hidden. When confronted properly, he will accept the divorce without complications." When Helen finally returned home late that afternoon, she felt like a completely different person, not just physically but emotionally and spiritually. She had discovered her own sensuality, her capacity to love and be loved, her inner strength. Edward had not yet returned from work. Helen took a long shower, observing her body in the mirror and seeing the subtle marks left by her afternoon with Valentine. She felt no guilt or shame, only a deep satisfaction and a growing determination. When Edward arrived, he found Helen in the living room, sitting with a posture he had never seen before. There was a new confidence in her, an energy that immediately put him on alert. "How was your day?" he asked casually. "Transformative," she replied, looking him directly in the eyes. Edward seemed to realize that something had fundamentally changed, but he couldn't pinpoint exactly what. "Helen, we need to talk about our discussion yesterday. Perhaps I was too direct about certain issues." "You don't have to lie to me anymore, Edward. I know exactly what my situation is in this marriage." "And what is your situation?" Helen stood up, walking until she was close to him. "I'm a prisoner in a life I didn't choose, married to a man who sees me as a game piece, but that's about to change." Edward paled. "Helen, you don't understand the complexities. I understand perfectly, and I also understand that I can choose a different life. That's not possible. The agreements can be broken, especially when they involve questionable activities that certain people would prefer to keep secret." Edward looked at her with a mixture of surprise and fear. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know more than you imagine, and very soon you will too." That night, Helen slept deeply for the first time in years. She dreamed of Valentine, of freedom, of a life where she could be truly herself. When she woke up, she knew exactly what she had to do. The plan for her liberation had begun. 3 weeks after that transformative afternoon, at Valentine's home, Helen was sitting in the conference room of the most prestigious law firm in New York. Beside her, Valentine held her hand firmly. Across from them sat Edward, Bianca, and 2 men she didn't know. but whom Valentine had identified as representatives of the powerful families involved in the secret agreements. Helen's lawyer, Dr. Henry Morris, a specialist in complex marital dissolutions recommended by Valentine, arranged documents on the table. "Let's get straight to the point," Dr. Morris said. "My client desires the immediate dissolution of her marriage based on evidence of coercion, manipulation, and fraudulent agreements that violated her right to free and informed consent." One of the unknown men, introduced only as Mr. Damascus, laughed bitterly. "Mrs. Montgomery, you do not understand the magnitude of the commitments involved. This is not a simple divorce." "I understand perfectly," Helen replied with a firmness that surprised everyone in the room. "I understand that I was sold by my family to settle political debts. I understand that my marriage was arranged to protect dirty business. And I understand that you counted on my ignorance and submission to keep this system running." Bianca, who had remained silent until that moment, leaned forward. "Helen, you're making a terrible mistake. There are consequences you can't even imagine." "Consequences for whom?" Helen interrupted. "For my family? For your shady business dealings? Or consequences for me for finally choosing my own life?" Valentine placed a tablet on the table, displaying a folder of scanned documents. "Gentlemen, I believe we should clarify exactly what these consequences you're threatening are." Mr. Damascus looked at the documents and his expression changed drastically. "How did you get these?" "The relevant question is what we will do with this information," Valentine said calmly. "Over-invoicing contracts with the federal government, money laundering through political campaigns, tax evasion. There's enough material here to keep federal prosecutors busy for years." Edward, who had remained silent and visibly shaken, finally spoke. "Helen, you don't understand what you're doing. These men will not accept being exposed quietly." "Then they will have to accept a deal that benefits everyone," said Dr. Morris. "My client wants her freedom. In return, the documents that compromise your businesses will remain confidential. It's a simple and reasonable proposal." The second unknown man, Mr. Villalobos, whom Helen finally recognized as a distant relative of her mother's, slammed his hand on the table. "This is blackmail." "This is justice," Helen retorted. "You blackmailed me for 3 years. You used my family loyalty against me, kept me prisoner in a life I never chose. Now it's my turn to set the terms." Bianca tried one more time. "Helen, our friendship never existed," Helen interrupted, looking directly at her. "You were paid to spy on me, manipulate me, and report on my life to other people. That's not friendship. It's professional betrayal." The tears that began to stream down Bianca's face seemed genuine, but Helen was unmoved. "I really did care about you," Bianca said softly. "If you cared, you would have told me the truth. You would have given me the choice to decide my own life." Valentine watched the table intently, analyzing each person's reaction. After a few minutes of tense silence, he spoke. "Gentlemen, I'll make the decision easier for you. I have copies of these documents in several secure locations, with instructions for them to be automatically delivered to the FBI should anything happen to me or Helen. I also have additional evidence on the specific activities of each person present that could be very inconvenient if made public." He opened another folder on the tablet, showing photographs, bank statements, and additional documents. The tension in the room visibly increased. "Edward, for example, there are detailed records of the 1998 incident with Laura Mendez, including witnesses who were paid to remain silent. Her family might be interested in revisiting the case, especially now that the statute of limitations for sexual crimes has been extended." Edward turned completely pale. "You can't—" "I can, and I will if necessary. Bianca, your offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and the regular payments you receive through shell companies also make for interesting reading. For IRS auditors." Bianca lowered her head, defeated. "And gentlemen," Valentine continued, addressing the two men, "do you really want me to publicly detail the bid-rigging scheme for public works that you've been coordinating for over a decade?" The silence in the room was absolute. Finally, Mr. Damascus sighed deeply. "What exactly do you want?" "It's simple," Helen said, taking back control of the conversation. "I want a divorce with no contest. I want my family to be released from any debt or commitment, related to the agreements that led to my marriage, and I want guarantees that no retaliation will be taken against me or anyone close to me. And in return? In return, the compromising documents will remain permanently sealed. I will not expose your activities and will not seek any additional financial compensation. Dr. Morris placed pre-drafted contracts on the table. We have prepared documents that formalize these terms. Once signed by all parties, the matter will be permanently closed. The next 30 minutes were tense, with discreet phone consultations between the parties and their respective legal teams, but eventually all the documents were signed. When they left the law firm, Helen felt an immense weight being lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in her adult life, she was truly free. "How do you feel?" Valentine asked as they walked down Fifth Avenue. "Scared, relieved, free, all at the same time." "And now?" Helen stopped and faced him. During the past few weeks, while planning her liberation, they had avoided talking about the future of their relationship. There was too much to resolve, too many emotions to process. "Now, I want to get to know the real Helen, the woman who chooses her own life, who makes her own decisions. I want to discover who I am when I'm not playing a role to please other people. And me? Am I part of these plans?" Helen smiled, feeling light for the first time in years. "You freed me from a prison, Valentine. But I don't want to trade one cage for another, even if it's gilded and voluntary." Valentine looked worried for a moment, but Helen continued. "I want to be with you because I choose to be, not because I need protection or out of gratitude or because you saved me. I want to be with you because I love you and because I choose to build a life with you. And what if you discover you don't love me as much as you think? What if it's just a reaction to your liberation?" Helen stepped closer to him, placing her hands on his face. "Then we'll find out together. But Valentine, what I feel for you is real. It's the first thing that's truly mine in many years." 6 months later, Helen was in her new apartment in the West Village, a space she had chosen and decorated entirely on her own. It was smaller and simpler than the mansion on the Upper East Side, but it was hers. Every piece of furniture, every color, every object reflected her personal choices. She had started working as an independent cultural consultant, using her knowledge of art and literature to help companies develop cultural programs. It was a modest start, but it was a job she had chosen, and that brought her genuine satisfaction. Valentine visited regularly, but kept his own apartment. They had decided to build their relationship gradually, without external pressures or expectations. It was the first time Helen had experienced a relationship based on genuine mutual choice. "How was therapy today?" Valentine asked, finding her cooking on a Sunday afternoon. "Productive. We talked about forgiveness." "Forgiveness?" "Forgiving my parents for selling me, forgiving Edward for agreeing to buy me, forgiving Bianca for betraying me, and most importantly, forgiving myself for taking so long to find the courage to change." Valentine hugged her from behind as she stirred the pasta sauce. "And did you manage?" "I'm working on it. Dr. Lopez says forgiveness is a process, not a single event." "And us? How are you feeling about us?" Helen turned in his arms, looking him directly in the eyes. "I'm feeling loved. Truly, for the first time in my life. Even knowing that I started our approach with questionable intentions, especially because of that, because you changed, because you chose to love me instead of possess me." Valentine kissed her softly. "I love you, Helen. The strong woman you've become, the vulnerable woman you always were, the brave woman who decided to fight for her own freedom. I love you too, but more importantly, I love myself." Finally. A year after the divorce, Helen and Valentine married in a small, intimate ceremony at an inn in Napa Valley. Only close family and a few friends were present, people who truly cared about them, not about status or appearances. Helen wore a simple dress she had chosen herself, without consultants or third-party opinions. Valentine wore a casual, light-colored suit. The ceremony was conducted by an officiant who spoke of true love, free choice, and the courage to start over. During the exchange of vows, Helen spoke of finding not just a true love, but finding herself. Valentine spoke of how Helen had taught him the difference between possessing and loving, between controlling and supporting. There were no professional photographers or society coverage. There were only two people freely choosing to commit to each other, based on true love and mutual respect. Years later, when Helen looked back on her journey, she recognized that her first life had been necessary for her to fully appreciate her second. The gilded cage had been terrible, but it had prepared her to recognize and protect true freedom when she finally found it. Edward eventually remarried, this time to a woman who truly chose to marry him. The trauma that prevented him from having real intimacy remained a challenge, but he began therapy to deal with his inner demons. Bianca disappeared from the New York social scene after her financial schemes were exposed. Some said she moved abroad, others that she was living quietly upstate. Helen never heard from her again and found that she didn't miss her. And Helen finally discovered what it meant to be truly alive. She discovered the difference between existing and living, between appearing and being, between pleasing others and choosing herself. Most importantly, she discovered that it's never too late to start over, never too late to choose your own happiness, never too late to be free. Sitting on the porch of her new home watching Valentine tend to the garden they had planted together, Helen smiled, thinking about how life can change when you finally find the courage to say no to what imprisons you and yes to what sets you free. She was finally completely free, and more importantly, she was loved by someone who valued her exactly as she chose to be.